In this video, we will examine the individuals who were executed in February. We will explore their crimes, last words, and final meal requests before facing their fate. Marion Bowman, South Carolina, on February 16, 2001. 20-year-old Marion Bowman got into an argument with 21-year-old Candy Louise Martin over a debt. The dispute escalated into violence when Bowman shot Martin multiple times in a wooded area. He then dragged her body, placed it in the trunk of a car, and set it on fire in a remote location. Hours before the murder, Bowman had threatened Martin, telling her, "You'll be dead before nightfall." He warned her, "You'll be dead before nightfall." His cousin, James Tawan Gatson, later testified against him, stating that he witnessed the crime and that Bowman had planned it in advance. Although some evidence was inconclusive, investigators recovered the murder weapon from a river and linked it to Bowman through ballistic and DNA testing. In 2002, he was sentenced to death. Over the years, Bowman maintained his innocence, claiming that crucial evidence had been concealed and that racial bias played a role in his conviction. The day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. He requested fried seafood, chicken wings and strips, onion rings, banana pudding, German chocolate cake, and cranberry pineapple juice. On January 31, 2025, Bowman was executed. He was executed by lethal injection in South Carolina. As the execution chamber curtain opened, he briefly glanced at his attorney, then at the ceiling, before closing his eyes. When asked for his final words, he said, "Death row inmates may be labeled as the worst, but we've all changed since that moment that cost us everything. I know Candy's family suffers, and rightfully so. They're angry. If my death brings them any relief, then I suppose it will have served some purpose. I hope they find peace." Stephen Nelson, Texas. On March 3, 2011, 24-year-old Stephen Nelson entered North Point Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas, intending to commit a robbery. Inside, only Reverend Clint Dobson, 28, and Church Secretary Judy Elliott, 69, were present. Nelson, who was already on parole for a prior assault, launched a brutal attack. He beat and strangled Dobson with a computer cable before suffocating him with a plastic bag. Elliott suffered severe injuries, including facial fractures and a brain hemorrhage. Despite her life-threatening injuries, Elliott survived after a long and difficult recovery. Following the attack, Nelson stole Dobson's laptop, Elliott's credit cards, and her car. He used the stolen cards to purchase clothes and jewelry, and sold the laptop for cash. However, authorities quickly identified him through fingerprints and bloodstains found on his shoes. Nelson was arrested and convicted of capital murder, a crime punishable by death in Texas. Although another man was initially detained in connection with the crime, the charges against him were later dropped. On February 5, 2025, Stephen Nelson was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville State Penitentiary. Because Texas does not offer special last meals to death row inmates, he did not receive one. He was pronounced dead at 6:50 p.m. Central Standard Time. Just before the injection, Nelson repeatedly told his wife, Helen Noah Dubois, that he loved her and was grateful for her support. Dubois, watching from the witness room, held up a white service dog that she had been allowed to bring with her. "It is what it is," Nelson said, before adding, "Enjoy life." As the lethal dose was about to be administered, he declared, "I'm not afraid. I'm at peace. Let's ride, Warden." As the pentobarbital took effect, he turned to his wife and softly said, "Let me sleep." His final word was love, before gasping twice and struggling for breath. His body trembled briefly before becoming still. He was pronounced dead 24 minutes later. Demetrius Taryn Frazier, Alabama. On November 27, 1991, Demetrius Taryn Frazier broke into the apartment of 40-year-old Pauline Starks Brown in Birmingham, Alabama. After forcibly waking her up, he demanded money and sexually assaulted her at gunpoint. He then shot her, and despite Brown pleading for her life, Frazier murdered her before stealing the money months later. On March 8, 1992 in Detroit, Michigan, Frazier attempted to assault 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick. He held her captive in an abandoned house, and when she tried to escape, he shot her, ending her life. Frazier was arrested shortly after in Michigan, where he confessed to both crimes. In 1996, he was convicted of the murder of Pauline Brown in Alabama and sentenced to death. In 2018, he chose to be executed by nitrogen hypoxia, a method adopted in Alabama as an alternative to lethal injection. The day before his execution, Frazier was offered a last meal. He requested Taco Bell, including burritos and a Mountain Dew soda. On Thursday night, the state of Alabama carried out his execution using nitrogen hypoxia. He was pronounced dead at 6:36 p.m., according to Governor Kay Ivey's office, making him the fourth person in the state to be executed using this method. When asked for his final words, Frazier said, "First of all, I want to apologize to the friends and family of Pauline Brown. What happened to her should never have happened. I want to apologize." James Dennis Ford, Florida. In 1997, James Ford invited Greg and Kimberly Mallory on a fishing trip, but the outing turned into a horrific attack. Ford shot Greg in the head with a .22 caliber rifle before striking him with an axe. Kimberly was also struck in the head, sexually assaulted, and then murdered. Their 22-month-old daughter was left in their truck for over 18 hours, exposed to the elements and covered in her mother's blood. Ford was convicted of murder, sexual assault, and child abuse. The brutality of the crime, along with the vulnerability of the child, made the case particularly egregious. Despite multiple appeals, his death sentence was upheld in 1999, and he remained on death row at Florida State Prison for over 2 decades. In recent years, Florida's use of the death penalty has been inconsistent. In 2024, only 1 execution took place, compared to 6 carried out in 2023. However, Governor Ron DeSantis signed Ford's execution order, marking the end of a period of inactivity in the state. The day before his execution, Ford was offered a last meal. He requested steak, macaroni and cheese, fried okra, sweet potato, pumpkin pie, and sweet tea. When asked for his final words, Ford remained silent. Lying strapped to the gurney before 25 witnesses, he had nothing to say. However, the Department of Prisons later reported that he had written a message on paper, which read, "Hugs, prayers, love, God bless you all." Richard Lee Tabler, Texas. In November 2004, Richard Lee Tabler murdered nightclub manager Mohammed Ramouni and his friend Zed in Killeen, Texas. Tabler, along with his accomplice Timothy Don Payne, lured Ramouni under the pretense of selling him sound equipment. Upon arriving at the location, they ambushed him, shooting Zed first before turning their gun on Ramouni. As Ramouni was dragged from the car, he was shot again. After the double murder, Tabler stole Ramouni's wallet and other valuables from the vehicle, while Payne recorded the crime on a video camera. Later, Tabler himself called the police, not to confess, but to take credit for the killings and threaten additional murders. 2 days later, on November 28th, he struck again. This time, he murdered Amanda Benefield and Tiffany Lorraine, 2 teenage employees at the same nightclub. Tabler had chosen them from a list of workers he believed had implicated him in the previous killings. In the days that followed, he continued to taunt law enforcement, making repeated calls to the police and issuing further threats. Tabler was eventually arrested and charged with 4 counts of murder. His violent actions, along with his ongoing threats, led to a swift conviction and a death sentence. On February 13, 2025, Richard Lee Tabler was executed at the age of 46. He was pronounced dead at 6:38 p.m. after receiving a lethal dose of pentobarbital. Tabler was the second person executed in Texas that year. In his final statement, he apologized to the families of his victims, some of whom were present to witness his execution. He also expressed gratitude to his family, legal team, and the death row staff for their support. "Not a day goes by that I don't regret my actions," he said. "I had no right to take their loved ones, and I can only ask and pray that one day they find it in their hearts to forgive me. But I know that no apology will ever bring them back."